You know that feeling you get when you spend even a little time outside? No matter how challenging it is to get out there, spending time in nature is always worth it. I'm your host, Amy Bouchatz, and this is another episode of Humans Outside. Join me as we hear from fascinating outdoor-minded guests and use the Humans Outside 365 challenge of spending time outside every day no matter what to push us outside daily. I've been a journalist for 2 decades, and I love asking questions, but I also love going outside. So why not combine the two? Ready to hear from experts and outdoor lovers who make heading into nature just a part of who they are while we work to do the same? Let's go. Hey humans! As we get ready for outdoor adventures in the spring and summer weather, you might be thinking about safety in the outdoors. That's something that I talked about a while back with today's Best of episode guest, Nicole Snell. Nicole Snell is an expert in women's self-defense in outdoor environments, and in this episode of Humans Outside, she talked about some of her tips for staying safe in the outdoors, specifically as a female recreating alone. But of course, these tips are good for anybody. I hope you enjoy this episode with Nicole Snell, and definitely go give her a follow, by the way, on Instagram and her YouTube page, and even on Facebook. She posts some really great content about staying safe in the outdoors, about classes she has coming up, and tips and tricks you can use in your everyday life to empower you to get outside more and feel better about doing it. Okay, here's that episode with Nicole. As a woman who often finds herself trail running or adventuring solo, one of the first things people ask me is if I'm worried about being safe when I'm out there. I do usually feel safe, but the question always makes me stop and question myself. Should I feel silly for being out there? Am I really taking a big risk because I'm a woman? Is saying out loud right now on this podcast that I do things solo asking for trouble? I am not the only woman in the world who has solo adventures, nor am I the only one who questions whether that's the right thing to do or the safe thing to do. I have many friends who simply don't go do stuff alone because they're worried that it's not safe. Those feelings are totally okay. No matter where you fall on the how you feel about this spectrum, there is no judgment here. Today's guest hears all of these questions all the time too, and she has answers. Nicole Snell teaches women to feel confident in the outdoors by empowering everyone with self-defense tools. The owner of Girls Fight Back, she speaks at and directs workshops internationally, and in the past has even facilitated sexual assault prevention workshops for the Pentagon. Regardless of gender, if you're someone who feels unsafe in the outdoors or simply wants to feel more safe, today Nicole is going to help us with the empowerment we need to get out there boldly. Nicole, welcome to Humans Outside.
Thank you so much for having me. It is such a pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm just really excited to talk to you. This is a by request topic. I had a podcast listener say, hey, have you ever thought of talking to somebody about this? And I'm really curious about this myself. So this is going to be really informative for everybody. So I really appreciate you taking the time to share your expertise and your passion for this with us. It's a huge deal. So thank you.
I'm excited to share information that I hope is going to help a lot of people.
Yeah. So we always start our episodes by sort of imagining ourselves hanging out with our guests somewhere they love outside. So if we were going to have this conversation with you outside somewhere that you just can't get enough of, where are we?
We are going to be on the Big Pine Lakes Trail at Lake number 2 overlooking Temple Crag. And this is a beautiful mountainous area in the Eastern Sierra. And it is one of my favorite places to go. And I was just there in June.
Awesome. And is this the Eastern Sierra in California or in Nevada?
Oh, it's the Eastern Sierra in California.
Okay, awesome. So, just like to know what state we're in, generally speaking.
Of course.
So tell us first, how did you become somebody who likes to go outside? How did this become an interest and a passion for you?
Well, I have always loved the outdoors, and I feel like it was just part of me from the moment I stepped foot on the desert for the first time, on the desert ground for the first time. So I grew up in Southern California in a small desert town called 29 Palms. My dad is a retired Marine, and the desert was my playground. And I just remember being a little kid and just being fascinated with the dirt and finding shiny rocks and my older brother showing me how to catch grasshoppers and not be afraid of them. And seeing the mountains turn purple during the sunrise or the sunset. I just love to be outside. I was always so curious about everything, and every little discovery just made my heart beat faster. And as I got older, that never went away. And in fact, I think it actually amplified the more freedom I had to see even more places. And also for me growing up, the being inside my house was not always safe. And so for me, being outside was what felt safest. It was where I could be free, where I could be independent, where I didn't have to worry about the things that I knew I would be worried about inside my home. So being outside gave me that chance to just feel connected to the outdoors in a way that spoke to me. And I've kind of carried that feeling with me as I've been out adventuring. So it's really been with me since I was a kid.
Yeah. We had a guest, gosh, a lot of seasons ago, Judith Sedora, who talked about using nature as a container. She uses therapy outside. And she talks about using outdoors and nature as a container. And that's really a concept that I just loved from her. And that's sort of what you're describing, that you get to be in this space and it contains you and contains all the things that you have going on out there. It's just like it gives context to everything. Love it.
Yeah, I love that. That is a great way of explaining it.
So that's awesome. So now you are a self defense specialist, sort of broadly, and you have a passion point for outdoor self defense. So maybe you can tell us about how you got into self defense and then how outdoor self defense became a passion point.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always actually been a very athletic person. I played sports in high school. I've done martial arts off and on throughout my life because I enjoy just the physicality of it, and I love sports so much. But what actually got me into self-defense specifically was, I would say this was about 10 or 12 years ago, maybe a little longer. I was dating a guy and we were play wrestling in my apartment, and he pinned me on the ground and I couldn't get out of the pin, and he was laughing. And granted, this was all in fun. We were play fighting, but a little alarm bell went off in the back of my head. And I said to myself, what if this was real? What if he got angry one time and did this? Or what if somebody else put me in this position? And right now, I don't know what to do. And I don't like ever not knowing what my options are in a situation. In fact, that's what informs a lot of the hobbies that I have gained over the years, is just that curiosity of, well, what can I do? What would I do? What are my options, even in worst case scenarios? And so I decided it would be beneficial to learn. I wanted to know for myself. And so that brought me to self-defense. And I took a couple of classes and really had a passion for it and wanted to learn more. But at that time, I was working as a line producer in TV production. And so that was my career, and my passion for self-defense was something I was like, oh, I kind of like this. This might be a new hobby, but I don't have the time for it right now. And then in 2014, I actually changed careers and started doing work with a company that was contracted with the Department of Navy to do sexual assault prevention trainings at military installations around the world. And I thought, wow, this is great because it gets me to doing more of what I want to do, which is I want to help women. I want to address sexual assault. I want to address domestic violence and find more ways to help people. And the organization that I was working for had a connection to a company called Girls Fight Back. And when I looked at their website and saw what they do self-defense seminars for colleges. I remember I jumped up at my computer screen and said, what? This is possible? I can teach this? This is a job you can do? And so I emailed the owner of the company at the time and asked for a job. And about 3 months later, they had a job opening available. And so part of the speaker training was to graduate from a 20-hour full force self-defense class with impact personal safety. So I finished that class and decided I wanted to teach that as well. So I was simultaneously doing facilitated discussions for the military, getting trained in doing college events with Girls Fight Back, and also being trained and being an assistant with Impact Personal Safety until I finally finished all my training hours and became a certified lead instructor. And through all of this, I was always going outdoors. I was going on solo trips. I was going on solo hikes and solo camping because it's something I've done my whole life. And people throughout my life have always been telling me, you should put the two together. Why don't you do something and teach self-defense for the people that are going outside? And honestly, Amy, I just didn't think it was something anyone would care about. I kept turning it down and dismissing everyone's suggestions and saying, nobody's going to want to hear about that. That's not something that anyone's going to care about, and it's going to fail if I tried to do something because they're going to say, "Why do we, and I just was my own worst critic." And then in 2019, I had another friend who was a lot more vocal about telling me that I really should do this. And she was like, "No, like you need to just do it. You need to just do it because this is something people need." And I finally was like, "Okay, fine, I'll just do it." And then that's how Outdoor Defense was born, my YouTube series. And the reception to it was warm. And then COVID hit, and a lot more people were going outside solo. And then it really took off. And people were really looking for resources to feel safe. And why I do this is because the outdoors is so passionate. Like, I'm so passionate about the outdoors myself. Like, I find so much joy in being outside, and especially in being outside solo, because I feel so free to experience the nature and the world in a way that works for me. And I can meditate and I can be with my own thoughts and I can make my own decisions and stay longer at one spot or go faster in one spot. It's just really mine. Like, it's my experience. But I know a lot of people are afraid of that experience because they're afraid of, what could happen. The majority thing that I hear when I do my Yes, I'm Hiking solo seminars is people are afraid of strange, scary, dangerous men, like men that have bad intentions. And I want to help alleviate that fear because we all know that the world can be a dangerous place. So my job is not to try to make people more afraid. My job is to help alleviate that fear and help people gain more access to the outdoors by giving them simple strategies, simple techniques that anybody can use to feel more confident in their ability to handle situations and protect themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I have to touch just really fast on your friend who insisted that this was a good idea because of course it is, right? How often though do we question our own expertise in something just in the world? Because we think that something that we are passionate about and an expert in is not a question, right? Because it's something that's close to us, we think, oh, everybody does this. No one has a real problem with this. This is why, why would this be something you need to hear about? And instead of standing in that moment where you're like, no, I am an expert in this. This is worth being out there for. This is worth hearing. And of course, I'm so grateful that you are because we get to have you here today. But yeah, I mean, COVID's moment number one for people doing stuff by themselves all of a sudden, right? So
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And yeah, you're so right. There's like not just in this situation, but there's been other situations in my life where you doubt yourself. You get the
Mhm.
imposter syndrome, or you just feel like this is important to me, but I doubt anyone else will think it's important, and you just self-sabotage. So I'm really
Right.
grateful that after being pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed, I finally had a friend that just gave me that final push, and then I did
Right.
it.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh man, imposter syndrome. We could go on about that too. So, okay. So let's back up a little bit because you're filling a need by doing this. But I want to know why there's a need. Okay. Why do people, many of them women, but not all, right? Sort of doesn't have to be tied to gender, feel unsafe recreating alone? Where does this feeling come from? Is it cultural? Is it reality? What's going on here?
So I think a lot of it is our culture. I mean, violence exists in our culture, in our country. It exists all over the world. It has for centuries. And there's a lot of stereotypes, a lot of them related to gender, about who is capable of protecting themselves and who needs to be reliant on other people to protect them. So if you're solo and you've been categorized by society as a person who has to rely on other people to protect you, then there's this fear of, well, if I go by myself and there's no one to protect me, then I'm helpless. And that couldn't be further from the truth. And that's why I teach these skills so that people understand and realize their power and don't have those fears. And if they do have fear, they do experience something on the trail, that they have options for how they can respond. And I also want to say, too, while we're talking about this, that no one is ever at fault for violence that happens to them. If someone experiences violence, it's not because they were by themselves. It's not because they
Right.
were wearing a certain thing. It wasn't because of any of those factors. The fault is always on the criminal. It always has been, it always will be. And whatever anybody does or did to survive our situation, that's the right thing to do. And I'm not here to teach to what happened in the past. I'm here to help people heal from whatever happened in the past by giving them strategies and confidence for the future so that they can feel more capable of living their life large. I always like to say I want people to live their life limitlessly because there's a lot of restrictions that are touted as safety that we're expected to do and follow, and all these rules that are supposed to guarantee our safety, and they're not guarantees of safety. And all they do is limit and control our lives. So I am not here to give people limits or say, don't do this and don't do this. And you make sure you
Right.
carry this. I'm here to say, all right, well, let's give you some strategies and tools that you can keep in your toolbox, your mental toolbox, and you get to pick what works for you based on your unique situation because it's always going to be different.
Right. But it's all from the starting point of one, acceptance of how you feel about this, and two, saying, okay, I see that, I feel that, I hear that. Now I'm going to do something about it instead of letting it passively just be where I am and keeping me at home.
Yes, exactly. And another thing that I think is we always hear these terrible, sensational stories on the news of violence that
Mm.
happens, especially violence that happens to women, is very much in our cultural awareness because we hear about it all the time. And a lot of times it's made to seem like the most dangerous place we can be is somewhere where we're by ourselves or at night in the dark because a stranger is going to be the perpetrator. When in reality, 86% of the time, women are assaulted by people we know. It's our
Mhm.
friends, it's our intimate partners, it's family members, it's acquaintances. It's not necessarily the stranger. And yes, stranger attacks do happen, but they're not the most common or likely experience that women have. But there's that fear of, again, being solo and being outdoors means nobody can save you, that you're not capable of saving yourself, society says, and that it's going to be
Right.
a stranger. So it's
Right.
all of these stereotypes and urban legends and frankly lies that are out there that are limiting people. And I'm just trying to break through all of those and give people hope.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you as a news reporter, woman goes on a hike by herself safely alone. Not a good story. Like,
Oh, yeah, I would never make the news for that.
right. Why would you read that story? Right.
Right.
Although I say that and we laugh, but on the flip side, sometimes that is a good story because it's so freaking rare that people feel empowered to do that. As I was just saying, like, that's not a good story. I had this memory of sitting in a car listening to a story on our local NPR station about a woman who hiked this long backpacking trail alone, but not alone. She had her infant with her. Okay. So to me, this is like one, exhausting, and two, very vulnerable, right? You're literally out there in the world with your baby in the middle of nowhere. And that is memorable and interesting because it's an unfortunately brave thing, right? It's brave because it's something that's not common is I guess what I mean. I wish that was more common and less interesting when somebody does that.
Right. Well, maybe we can get to that point where that happens. And also, that woman is a badass.
Right. Also that. I mean, take okay. It's an interesting story because she was completely by herself and because she took her infant, while also being alone. I wish it was an interesting story just for the infant part, not because she had the courage to go hike by herself. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. Hey humans. If you want to build your own outdoor habit, the Humans Outside 365 Challenge is a great way to get started. You can even score some really cool and exclusive challenge swag, including a finisher decal and medal in the process. All you need to do is visit humansoutside.com/challenge. You'll also get an outdoor challenge guide written by me for you, an exclusive challenge tracker, and insider info all year long. You don't want to be left out of this. Go to humansoutside.com/challenge to learn more now. Okay, back to the show. Okay, so let's talk about those tools. Very first thing we have to ask you though, and I know you get asked about this a lot, like it's must be the top question. When we say self-defense tools, are we talking actual tools, pepper spray, weapons, whatever? What are we talking about? And what's your advice on the physical tool part of this?
That is always the number one question I get is people always want to know, what do you suggest that I carry? And do you carry something? And When I'm talking about self-defense tools, I'm talking about our mental and our physical tools, not anything external that you need to buy or carry or wear or have on you or anything. And I actually wrote a blog and did an outdoor defense episode on this because I get asked it all the time. And I just wanted to give people information. So, what I always say is that I am an advocate for education. I am not here to tell you what to do or what not to do. I'm here to give you information and maybe information you might not have heard anywhere else so that you can make an informed decision about what's best for you and your safety. Because I'm not the expert of your safety or anyone else's safety or anyone listening safety because I am only me. I'm in charge and an expert of my safety. All I can do to help people with their safety is to give them information so that they can be better experts at their own safety because they're the ones that are ultimately going to be the ones making the decision in the moment of whatever they face in the world of how they're going to respond because how we respond is going to be different. So I'm all about education. And the reason why I focus on the tools you have on your body and on your mind, because those are the tools you always have with you. And the majority of times when we have to enter self-defense mode, as I call it, we're not necessarily using any physical. I don't go around heel palming people in the face, although sometimes I would like to. If someone's being really inappropriate, it'd be really nice to just throw an elbow, but I don't do that. I use my verbal skills. I use my intuition. I get to safety if that's an option. I use so many other skills that are not physical or not external in order to manage my safety in those moments. Those are the things I use every day. And that is still self-defense. It's more than just physical. It's so much more than the physical. So, and if we have to use the physical, we have our bodies all the time. There's not a place in the world that we can go where they're like, nah, sorry, you can't bring those fists. No, you can't bring those knees. But there are certain external tools that you can't bring, even within the US, into certain state parks or national parks or on planes, etc. So what I will say is I'm an advocate for education, and that if you do plan on bringing something external, no matter what that is, whether that's pepper spray or something that is more lethal, you have to train with it. That's the number one thing. Like, you have to train with it. And that's not something that's talked about as much as I think that it needs to be talked about, because when you are experiencing stress and you are experiencing adrenaline in a stressful situation, your fine motor skills decrease, your logic and reasoning decrease, and your gross motor skills increase. So that means unless you have been practicing and training with whatever tool you're planning to use, your fine motor skills aren't going to be working the way they are when you're calm. So unless you have that training behind you to be able to operate that in a stressful situation, it may not respond the way you're expecting it to. So if you are going to use something, you have to carry it. Make sure you know how to get it out, how to use it in situations when you may be expecting it. Like, I was hiking with a friend once and she carries pepper spray. And I was like, okay, great. Like, do you train with it? And she's like, no, not really, but I keep it here in the mesh pocket on the side of a backpack. And so I was like, okay, well, that doesn't seem very accessible if you needed to get to it quickly. And she's like, oh no, it's just right there. And I said, okay. So we walked on for about 10 minutes, and then I turned to her like really quick and I said, oh my gosh, get your pepper spray, pull it out, get it out right now, get it out right now. And I just was like really frantic about it. And she couldn't get it out. She couldn't get it out in time. And I said, that is why you have to practice with it. Even if it was in your pocket and you could easily get to it, that's still a fine motor movement. So that's the first thing, is whatever you carry, you train with it. The second thing I say is anything you carry, you have to understand there's a possibility it can be used against you, especially if you're not training with it. And the third thing that I like to say about weapons is I want to encourage people to reclaim their power by not putting all of their safety and security into something else, hoping that that something else is going to be the thing that saves them, and instead put that confidence into yourself and into your body and into your mind and into all the things that you do every day to manage your safety, and understand that's where your power is. And know that anything you do use is secondary. It's always going to be secondary to you.
So up here in Alaska, we're, I'm not sure, reasonably more concerned. Perhaps we should be just as concerned. But anyway, our concern tends to focus on animals. Okay. But the same concept applies. They say, whatever you take practice with. Now, the difference between bears and humans is that using your words probably isn't going to work out. So
Yes, exactly.
also throwing a punch, not recommended. So
Right.
Please, friends, do not try to throw an elbow on a bear. That's just my like, I'm not a bear expert by any means, but that is my advice for you today. Okay. So, but when they say practice with this stuff, that the same thing applies because if you're carrying, no matter what you're carrying, but let's just use bear spray, which is a very potent form of pepper spray for people who don't know, and you have it like at the bottom of your stuff in your backpack, this is not going to do you any good. If you have it behind you and you've never used it before or ever sprayed one, that's not going to do you any good. If you don't know how to take the clip off of it and how to spray it and what to think about while you do that, like, I'm not saying I'm saying, like, think about the direction of the wind, not empowering thoughts. Like, what to
Right.
think about while you're doing that from a practical standpoint. Because, again, just like you're saying, your motor skills are on the struggle bus at this point because of adrenaline. If you haven't gone through that stuff, you're going to be in a situation that's a whole lot worse than you were hoping it would be, even when meeting a bear has already degraded your situation for the day. And so those same things apply, and it's all about just understanding what your tools are and then using them. I want you to touch, if you don't mind, on the tool of using your words, because I think when, at least for me, when I think about self-defense, my words are not the first thing I think about. I'm thinking about
Your
throwing an
body.
elbow, my
Yeah.
body.
Yes.
So you're talking about self-defense as first line of defense is your words. So what do you mean by that? And can you give me some examples?
Yeah, absolutely. And your understanding of it or your thoughts about self-defense are very common. Most of the time when I say the word self-defense, or I'll even ask people in a session, like, when you hear the term self-defense, what do you think of? And most of the time people think of the physical, they're thinking of kicks and punches. And I don't teach punches, by the way. I teach open-handed heel palms, but they're thinking of the physical. And self-defense is used for more than just worst case scenarios. And like I said earlier, the majority of the self-defense scenarios that we face daily are less life-threatening and more boundary violations, or, speaking up in a way that asserts ourselves when we're feeling uncomfortable and things like that. So your voice is a weapon. Your voice is actually your first weapon that you use to protect yourself. And you use it every day to say yes to things you want, to say no to the things you don't, to set your boundaries, to communicate your needs, and to give yourself the space that you need, or to call people in if you need, more closeness from somebody. So an example in a self-defense scenario of using your voice would be like a verbal strategy. Would be like, if someone, let's use a hiking as an example. Let's say I'm hiking and someone is walking behind me and I'm just getting an intuitive feeling that something's not right, right? And I slow down, they kind of slow down, I speed up, they speed up. So now I'm pretty sure they're pacing me. I'm going to turn around. I'm going to turn around and face them, and I'm going to use my voice, and I'm going to say, "Hey, how are you doing this afternoon? It seems like you're following me. Did you need help with something?" And I'm going to directly address that person, because now they know that I'm aware of them. I'm facing them. So now they no longer have an advantage from walking behind me. And now I'm clearly asserting myself with confidence and with a boundary that could be a deterrent to somebody who does not have good intentions.
And I noticed in this example you just gave, the words "I'm sorry" did not escape your lips.
They did not.
Interesting.
They did not, because we don't have anything to apologize for setting our boundary. A lot of times we're conditioned, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I never say I'm sorry, that those words never come out of my mouth, because they do, because I'm human and it happens sometimes. But I try to be really intentional about it and not use it unless I've actually hurt somebody or caused someone pain or something. I try to use other words because I don't want anyone to feel like they have to apologize for setting boundaries or for taking up space in the world. And I don't have to try to minimize my boundary and make the other person feel better about what I just did for my own safety. And if that person that I just set a boundary with goes from 0 to 100 and just flies off the handle angry that I set a boundary, number one, that's not your fault. You did not cause them to do that. That's who they were. They were probably looking for an excuse to have that reaction. And that reaction they had reinforces that you did the right thing by setting a boundary. Because imagine if they had that reaction and you were closer to them, either physically, distance wise, or maybe you had like hung out with them more, or, in any situation, they just reinforced that your intuition was right. Second of all, even if they had that reaction, you still have other options because at that point you can use a different verbal strategy to try to de-escalate the situation. They've just given you the gift of showing you who they are. So now you can start thinking in your head, okay, well, how can I exit the situation safely? What may I have to do with my body position or my physical skills in order to get myself to safety? So we don't need to try to predict how someone's going to respond in a way that puts our safety at risk, meaning that we don't have to worry so much about someone else's feelings at the expense of our safety or at the expense of our comfort. Like your safety is always going to be more important than someone thinking that you think they're a criminal because they're creeping up behind you on a trail. It's like, well, then why were you creeping up on me on the trail? Like, don't try to gaslight me. I'm going to assert a boundary now. And if your feelings are hurt, then please, I hope you have someone to talk to about that when you get home. But I'm gonna reinforce my boundary. You don't owe niceness to anybody.
Yeah. Go ahead. Phone a friend. Thank you.
Yes.
You've used a word a couple of times now, and I want to talk about it because I heard you while I was prepping for this episode. I listened to your episode on She Explores, and you touched on the role of this word there. And you noted that we are the only creatures in the world, humans being we, who have mastered the art of ignoring this word. And the word is intuition. Okay. And that when you said that in that episode, I was like, I think I was in a grocery store or something. I was just like, my God, she's right. Um, and it was just such an eye-opening moment for me. So I'm hoping you can expand on that a little bit. Why do we do something so silly? So
Yeah, we're really the experts at that. All humans are pretty much the experts of ignoring their intuition. And that little tidbit, actually, I have to give credit to Gavin DeBecker and his book, The Gift of Fear, because he talks about that in depth about our intuition and how wonderful we humans are at ignoring it. And basically, we all had those intuitive feelings. And I'm sure everyone listening here has at some point in their life ignored their intuition. It's just human nature. We've done it. And our intuition is designed to protect us from danger, but we've all been socialized to place our judgment of a situation over what our body's trying to tell us about a situation. And we try to rationalize it and we try to talk ourselves out of it. Because if we get in it, let's say, for instance, you're on a hike with someone, you meet up a friend for a hike and they're bringing their friend from work. And the moment you meet this friend from work, you just get the intuitive feeling that, something's not right. And this person's nice and they're smiling and they know your friend. So obviously they must be a good person, right? And you should, maybe you're just imagining things. Maybe you are thinking about something else that happened, or maybe you start going in your mind through all of this rationalizing of why it's not okay that you're feeling this way or why you shouldn't be feeling this way. And we talk ourselves right out of that feeling. And I try to encourage people to listen to that feeling, even if you don't understand where it's coming from. And you might not. I'll give you an example. I was on a hike one time. It was right after COVID happened. And I was walking, I found this trail up near where I live that was still open. And so I'd done this hike a couple of times, and it's the evening because it's summer and it's hot. So I went in the evening right before sunset. And I had kind of just started the trail, and I'm at a part of the trail where I can see the trail like hugging the mountain. Yeah, I could see the trail for like the next half a mile or so. And I started to walk, and all of a sudden, I just this feeling in the pit of my stomach that told me stop. And I stopped and I looked up ahead and I didn't see anything. All right, the trail's exposed. There's one spot where there's like some overhang of tree. And I said to myself, Nicole, you are being ridiculous. You've done this trail before. There is nobody up there. Like, who's going to be hiding up there? And there's people right. And I just started doing the thing, the rationalizing and the justification. And so what I finally did is I stopped myself and I said, I'm trying to talk myself out of my intuition. And what did I do? I turned around and I went home because that trail is going to be there tomorrow and the next day and the next day. It's not worth it. I just trusted that feeling. I don't know where it came from. I went back like a couple days later, no feeling, finished the trail, walked back. It was fine. But I trusted that feeling because I know it's not going to send me down the wrong path, right? It's not going to send me into the mouth of the tiger. It's trying to send me away from the tiger or whatever other threat may be there. And we do ourselves a disservice by not listening to our intuition. I consider it one of the first foundations of safety. Like every other piece of self-defense advice and safety advice all layers on top of your intuition first and then your awareness.
I've come to, well, I heard a rumor that not everybody has a narrator in their head, but mine, my intuition is their narrator. And it's almost often I'm not hearing voices, right? But in my head, I hear this beautiful narration of my life. And sometimes it's something along the lines of I say something and the narrator said, no, she would not in fact do that, um, but sometimes you're out there doing something and it's that intuition that takes the role of this almost this narration where you're like, oh, wait a second. I can hear how this story is going to go, and I should consider my options.
Yes.
Maybe it's like a choose your own adventure narrator. Did you
Yes.
ever read those as a kid?
I
Those
did.
books?
I love those.
Turn to go down the fiery path. Turn to page 84. Turn. Yeah.
I love that.
The story ends. Go back to the whatever that other page was. Yep, that's the kind of thing. But your intuition almost serves as that junction in the Choose Your Own Adventure book. And you can, if you follow your gut, as you're saying, always go back to the previous page and pick the different adventure on a different day.
Right. Exactly. And here's the thing too is sometimes the limiting messages that exist out there say things like don't hike solo, right? We've all heard that. I've heard that all the time. And I love to hike solo, and I'm going to share as much information to encourage people who are considering it or do it all the time and just want to feel more confident. But instead of giving people hard absolutes like don't hike solo, it should be more about, hey, go out and hike solo, but here's how you can be prepared. And if you go to this trail and something feels off, give yourself the power to be able to turn around and pick a different trail versus just indiscriminately saying, just don't ever do it. It's like, no, how about we give people the tools to be prepared and make decisions that work for them?
Yeah, that's such great advice. So we're following our intuition, we're arming ourselves with the tools. I think this is almost an evangelism question, okay? How do we work to make heading outside into nature feel safe for not just for ourselves, but for other people? What do we do to message this better that this can be a safe thing?
I think people sharing their stories, people sharing their success stories of going out and hiking and being out there, I think can help because when you see more people doing it, it gives you the confidence to say to yourself, oh, I can do this too. I mean, I didn't have anybody who looked like me that was out hiking solo when I started doing it. I just did it because I loved it. And I would ask around to people that might have information about doing it. But for the most part, I just did it on my own. I did a lot of internet research of what to put on my hiking backpack. And the first hiking that I did was with a fanny pack and tennis shoes before I got like hiking boots and then started doing more trails that had more difficulty and needed more specific gear to do it safely. And I just slowly started adding up what I needed. But I think just having the resources available, people sharing their stories, and for goodness sakes, when people are out there recreating, it's important to pick up on social cues. And so if you're out there hiking, and I'm talking to mostly men here now, when you're out there hiking, please don't ask women if they're hiking by themselves. Please don't say things that are inappropriate. If you wouldn't want someone saying it to someone in your life that you cared about while they were on a trail, it's probably not a good idea to say those types of things to women that are hiking. I hear this all the time from people who are on through hikes or things where, they're just getting people asking them a lot of questions and where are you camping and how long have you been out here and who's with you and things like that. And whether you mean well or not, and maybe you're just trying to make conversation, those types of questions can make other people feel uncomfortable. So like being cordial and being polite is fine. Hi, how are you? Happy trails. Hey, it's great to, you can keep things polite if you want to engage with people on the trail, but it's important to also understand that there are fears that are out there. And if we can help women feel more confident being out there because they're not having as many of these awkward experiences with people who are not understanding why they shouldn't be saying those types of things, then we can start to change things for the better.
Yeah. Co-signed to the gentleman.
Yes.
Co-signed. Okay. Can you give us 3 or 4 tips or thoughts or strategies for creating and keeping our own safe space as we head outside? What's your advice?
So my top 3 or 4, the first I would say is your intuition. Trust that intuitive feeling. Second is to give yourself permission to notice your surroundings and to acknowledge what's happening in your environment. And that includes all the good things like catching a nature moment or a landscape or connecting with someone cool on the trail. And I've met a lot of cool trail friends that way, just running into someone on the way up a mountain and then doing the rest of the hike together. So there's always a chance of meeting some cool people out there. And just your awareness allows you to notice things and then to be aware if something isn't quite right. And then that gives you more options for what to do. The third thing I would say is always remember that you can use your voice and that you do not have to apologize for doing so. So say no if you need to, say back off if you need to, say, I'm not interested in having this conversation. You can say, look, I don't answer questions. It's actually one of my favorite things to say when people just start rattling off the questions to me. I'll say, I don't answer questions. I hope you have a nice day. Have a good day on the trail.
I'm not taking questions today.
Yeah, the Q&A is closed. Please continue on your way. And it doesn't matter if that person thinks you're an awful, mean, horrible person. What is their evaluation of me really mean to me, especially if it's a stranger? Why do I care if they think? I don't really care what a stranger thinks of me. If they've been making me feel uncomfortable and I set a boundary and they think to themselves I'm awful, well, okay, I guess I'm awful. But I'm also safe and I'm going to continue my hike safely. And if it's someone you know, then they should be willing to listen to your boundary. And it could be a longer conversation if you need to have that with somebody. And the last thing I'll say is remember that you're worth fighting for. And that fighting back is so much more than just the physical skills, but that if you have to use your body is full of weapons. Just a few that we have right now. We have that I can just name off: your hands, your palms, your nails, your elbows, your teeth, your knees, your feet, your brain, your voice. We have a lot of tools available to us if we need to. And physical self-defense is not about fighting strength with strength. We're not having combat where we're going to trade blows as if it's a boxing match, right? That's not how realistic violence happens. And so we're not using strength against strength. We're using our strong body parts against the vulnerable spots on another human body, because all human bodies have essentially the same vulnerable spots. And if you can aim the hard parts of your body into their soft spots, that can give you the space to get to safety.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Man, those are such good tips. And I heard Siri even was talking to you about
You know what? I'm holding the microphone and she's like, sorry, I didn't hear what you said. I'm like, gosh darn it, Siri, you're fired for the 10th time this week. You're fired.
It's okay because I'm not even going to say the name. It's so sensitive. It's on my desk and it responds at the drop of a hat and periodically starts playing Beyonce. And my family claims that they don't know why. And I'm not mad about it, but I am curious. So,
oh my gosh. I bet they trained a routine into it and didn't tell you. So every time you say book it, Liz is, oh, this is...
I'll be like in the kitchen making dinner and all of a sudden I hear all the single ladies going down in my office. And like I said, I'm not mad. I'm just confused. So
that's amazing though. That's really pretty amazing.
All right. That is so totally unrelated to what we've been talking about, but I'm going to leave it in this episode because it's so funny. All right. Nicole, thank you for joining us on this episode of the podcast. The final thing we're going to do is sort of walk ourselves out, imagining ourselves by hearing where your favorite outdoor space is, or I'm sorry, where your favorite outdoor memory. I'm so like distracted by Beyonce now. I can't get it together. Okay, I'm going to try that again. We always ask our guests to walk us out with their favorite outdoor memory. If you could describe a memory that you have of something outside, something you just like to think about and go back to. For example, one of mine is just this run I did through this field of wildflowers that's almost so great it's fake. So, where are you and what are you doing?
I am in New Zealand on the Tongariro Alpine Crossing, and I've just climbed to the top where Red Crater is, and I'm looking down the other side and I see a little pop of blue, and I walk a little bit further across and down, and the Emerald Lakes come into view, and they are 3 or 4 lakes that are just the most beautiful shades of blue and turquoise and green and teal because of the minerals in the ground. And I must have stayed there for about 45 minutes in the cold. It was freezing at the top, looking down at these lakes because it was so beautiful. It was, and the ground is smoking around you because it's geothermically active. So it's freezing cold. You're next to an active volcano. The ground is smoking, and then these beautiful blue lakes in front of you. It just doesn't make any sense.
Man, thank you for describing that so that we could picture it. That's great. I've never been there, so what a great visual picture. Nicole, thank you so much for joining us on Humans Outside podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me as a guest. It was great to talk to you.
That's a wrap on this episode of Humans Outside. But hey, I need your help. Enjoy this show? Leave a 5-star rating or review wherever you get your podcasts. It makes me feel good, but it also helps others find the show too, which is cool, right? Now, go get outside. Until next time, we'll see you out there.